The title of my sermon for today is Bring Your A Game. Well, I'm trying my best to bring my A game, but I'm not sure. We'll just have to see how this plays out. And I want to warn you that in lots of ways this is a very simple sermon of stories that will serve as, I think, strong metaphors for what's happening in Grace Church in these days. So help me this morning get my A game on by being open and imaginatively listen to this sermon. A simple sermon of 4 stories. One by the late, great preacher Fred Craddock. 2 from me, and 1 from Jesus. So these stories are simple, but very relevant to our lives if you will let your imagination work and consider them more metaphors than real stories. Let me begin with one of the several stories. The first one is that Fred Craddock, one of the great Southern preachers and teachers of preachers in the land, told about 10 years ago of an event that probably happened much earlier than that. And in Fred's words, we hear this story. I recall some years ago, he says, in a church I was visiting on a Sunday afternoon, a van pulled up in the church parking lot and a bunch of young people got out. They looked like 13, 14, 15, and maybe up to 18 years old. And Fred didn't say this, but I would say this: they looked a lot like Bobo looks most of the time. They got out with their bedrolls. It was the awfulest looking bunch of kids you've ever seen. Something like the cats would drag in, Fred says. They were really in bad shape. I said, "What is this?" And they had just returned from a work mission trip. They named the place where they had been. And 1 week with some other young people, they had built a small church for a community of folks to be able to have a safe place to worship. They were beat. They looked terrible. They were sitting on their bags out there outside waiting for their parents to come. And I said to one of the boys, "You tired?" He said, "Woo, I am tired." And then he said, "This is the best tired I've ever been in my life." A simple story of faith in action. Paul could never accuse these young people, those tired, ragged-looking young people, of being idle. This is the best tired I've ever felt. Over the past 30 years, I've led work groups of all sorts, to all sorts of places. Youth groups to Tennessee for a summer group.com home repair project. 20 adult work trips to Honduras and 1 youth group. Home repairs in Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. Habitat for Humanity work trips in Baltimore. In groups like these, folks don't always start out on their A game. You know, some come tired already, anxious, homesick before they even leave the church parking lot. But most start out excited and energetic with high expectations, prepared for the next new thing in their lives. And the second story is mine. When I was a runner, and I was a runner for 15 years maybe, I was often asked why I might run 7 miles a day or ride my bike 50 miles in the hills of Washington or Carroll County. And I'd often say flippantly, it feels so good when I stop. You can't feel this good unless you do it. You just can't feel the good unless you do the run. I think that's the case with our sharing of ourselves, with the giving of our lives and being disciples of Jesus Christ. The discipleship that follows faith is not easy. Faith is not easy. Giving of ourselves is always a challenge. Doing all the things that Jesus sets before us by his life and story and by the stories he tells demands something significant of us. And something significant is being asked of you. And the search committee, as the search committee prepares for you to call a new pastor. This requires this search committee's A game and yours as well. But for it to work, for our faith to grow, you've got to bring your A game. You're being eager or willing to do something new and challenging. You've got to be ready for what will come. And it often comes as a gift, even though we don't anticipate that. The 10 bridesmaids in Jesus' story in Matthew 25 that Gerry read this morning has 5 bridesmaids who came prepared. I'm not sure they knew what they were being prepared for, but they came prepared. The text calls them smart. And 5 who were not prepared, not ready, maybe they brought their C game, or maybe no game at all. But when the big event happens, and Jesus, I'm sure, constructed this story in a way to make this exciting, when the bridegroom finally shows up late at night, the 5 smart A-game bridesmaids were prepared. They had oil for their lamps. It's always interesting that the ones who were not so smart, the ones who were not so prepared, wanted the ones who were to help them, to bail them out. In this case, didn't happen. Now, let me tell you another story. When I was, and this is an older one from my life, when I was at my first church, Trinity UCC in Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, and I've alluded to this recently, for several summers I led a long backwoods tent sleeping, cooking on our own meals on an open fire camp for 12 teenagers. I am one of the bravest people in the world. I was at that time anyway. This was at the Penn Central Conference Hartman Center near State College, Pennsylvania. Normally all the summer camp kids stayed in cabins, and I had been there as a counselor in the past. The cabins were comfortable, hot showers, walk to the dining room to get our meals. We were out in the woods on our own, no electricity, and the kids were told to leave all electronic stuff at home, like hair dryers. The first year I led this camp, all went well. We learned a lot about nature and poison ivy and snakes and had good food and had a good time. So needless to say, I was all set for the second year. Well, the second year of this camp came, and we woke up the first morning after a nice meal that we cooked and a pretty good sleep, and it was raining. It wasn't just raining or drizzling, it was really raining. And it rained all day, all night, all day the next day, all the next night. And so we tried the best we could, those of us who were prepared for this sort of thing, to keep our tents dry and to figure out a way to cook. We put up a tarp and we did all these things to try to make it work. And I was as good as anybody at keeping a tent dry on the inside. But by the third day of rain, I was soaking wet. Everything I had was soaking wet. And I went into the camp director and said, "We can't do this anymore. We are soaked to the bone. We are cold, even though it was summertime. Our food is just impossible." And so we discovered that some of the kids had been really prepared for anything, and they had done well during this. They were wet, but they were the wettest they had ever been. And they were the tiredest they had ever been. But the 5 girls who brought hair dryers, if they had only had electricity, and they might have been able to dry their hair, they were not so prepared. They were upset, they were miserable, they wanted to go home. So I said, "We have to come in, you have to give us a cabin, we have to get some showers, we have to get dry," which we did. And those who were more prepared, the ones who didn't bring hair dryers, could have said at the end, "I'm tired, I'm wet, I've been cold, but it's the best tired I've ever been." The other ones, silly ones who had not followed my instructions, who had brought all kinds of electronics, had not brought extra tarps and waterproof sleeping bags, they were not so happy. At the end of the week, the A-game group was tired, really tired, the very best tired of their lives. The others just tired of the whole experience, just like the 5 silly bridesmaids in the gospel lesson this morning. These silly girls with their hair dryers had locked themselves out of the wedding feast, the camp, and the camp party. But I will give it to them, when they did get into the cabins and take a hot shower, they could dry their hair. When the rest of us had to let our hair dry on its own. They sacrificed their potential feast by only focusing on their own needs. They were not ready for the coming of that great event in their lives that would bring them joy or engagement with the gift of that summer camp. And I pray that as we live into this challenging time of coming to the end of 2023, that you will find the courage, the intelligence, should I say, to live well into these days, to put on your A game, expecting the next big thing to happen, and that when it does, you receive it as a gift and give God the praise. Amen.